It's loading. Okay, I think that
Yeah, I got live.
working. Okay, cool. So you're on my channel. This is Sarcasmitron, some person that I encountered on the internet, and we're going to talk about games and politics. So Sarcasmitron, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm
Also, maybe like introduce your channel a little bit as well.
yeah. So I'm just a random YouTuber. I think I'm only about 70 so subs. Uh, and I started originally with two channels. I was going to have one channel for politics and one channel for video games, and then I decided I didn't care anymore, and I just smashed them together. Um, I I followed politics since I was really young, since almost like since I was 12. And in a way, like video games were an escape from that. And around 2013,
ruin that today, right?
yeah. Around 2013, I got really pessimistic about politics, and I just tried to erase it out of my life and just think about games, like as an art form. And Gamergate happened, and it like just sucked me back in. Like I couldn't escape it, and so it's just these two different streams of my life that I can't separate, and I can't jump from one or the other. And that's sort of expressed in the channel. Doesn't really, like, it was not meticulously planned around anything. It just kind of happened.
Well, it seems like you're in good company of like leftist YouTubers who also do gaming stuff. There seems to be a lot of overlap between people who want to make gaming content and people who want to make political content.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna kind of talk about that. Also, last time I checked, you're at like 120 subscribers. I had to like put your channel link in the description. So, like, congratulations.
Well.
Okay, yeah. So I guess I'll talk about a little bit about my history with gaming. So my like best friend kind of introduced me to game design elements when I was I think like 14 is the age. We went to this like school event where people were doing math competitively, and neither of us were able to participate for a variety of reasons. So we just spent like all day for like 3 days talking about video games, and she really introduced me to like game design, like basically the idea that games could be more than just like a bit of fun. Hey, I'm getting some feedback from your end. Can you maybe use some headphones or something?
I actually am using headphones. I'm not sure what's happening if you're getting feedback.
That's weird. Okay, I have no idea how that would happen. Maybe there's like an echo or something. But anyway, so that's kind of how I came to like think about games more deeply than just like, is this fun? Is it not fun? And I'm really glad she's the one that introduced me to that, because otherwise I probably would have been introduced through YouTube to the connection between like thinking about games as more than games. And it seems like the YouTube gaming space kind of has this weird connection to the alt-right. I don't know how that or why, but
because it's because of Gamergate. That was, I mean, that's the thing people don't realize about that, is that was a political project explicitly designed to funnel gamers into the right. And it just ended up being, I think, way more successful than anyone imagined it would be. And so now, unless you're inoculated against, being all right, it's very easy to get sucked in if you spend a lot of time on the internet and video game spaces.
Yeah. It's also, it's the kind of like right-wing ideas about video games and like the role that they play in society are very, very common. And I think those ideas are almost a little bit disrespectful to games, because I think there's a tendency to think of them as like, oh, this is fun. It's like an escape from reality, and SJWs are coming to like take your toys away or something like that.
Right. But also, SJWs can successfully indoctrinate children through video games. So they're just fun, but also they're completely dangerous, and we need to control them.
Yeah, it's a strange paradox. I think it kind of happens with the the alt-right's like approach to celebrities as well, where like celebrities are like stupid and you should ignore them and whatever, until like Candace Owens wants to say something nice about the right wing,
Right.
or until Kanye says something nice about Candace Owens, and then all of a sudden celebrities are God's gift to mankind. But the thing about Gamergate that confuses me is like, so there's this connection between like pickup artistry and the right wing, and that like kind of makes sense to me on some level. That like if you're the kind of person who views other human beings mechanically as like a goal to be achieved, then you're probably going to be attracted to right wing politics and also to being a pickup artist. But I don't understand why what like personality trait or what like force attracts people both to video games and to right-wing politics at the same time.
I guess the glib answer is social isolation. But I mean, games kind of encourage you to treat people as like a means to an end too. So it's not too different from pickup artistry.
That's true. I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, I was playing a game the other day that people are like freaking out about called Monster Prom, and I got into like really heated argument with someone about whether or not we can have dating simulators that don't objectify people, because like you literally have to turn a person into an object in code in order.
Yeah. Like literally, there's an algorithm where, and you know, it's always simplified because it's impossible to make something as complicated as a person. At least now.
Yeah, well, maybe one day. Okay, cool. So I think you agreed to explain the Metal Gear Solid plot to me at some point, and something to do with politics. Yeah, I've heard this is a notoriously difficult thing to explain to complete noobs, and I am a complete noob. So please go ahead.
Okay. So I guess I'll go in chronological order instead of the order the games go in, just for simplicity. Which means I'm starting with the third game. So basically, a CIA agent steals a shoulder-mounted nuclear missile launcher, and gives it to a GRU colonel, who then launches a false flag attack on the Soviet Union. And the purpose of this is to basically speed up the coup that overthrew Khrushchev and replaced him with Brezhnev. And then the hopes that the hardliners would start World War III with America. They send a super spy in named Snake. And Snake, basically what you find out is that this thing about starting World War III is a false front, and this is actually about stealing a giant hoard of money that was stocked away by the Allied powers during World War II, and basically like is half the world economy, and just like this one like number of bank numbers and stuff.
Yeah, half the world's economy in like gold bars.
Yeah, and so there's a bunch of subplots about these World War II veterans who all have superpowers for some reason, and
it's from Patriot.
Yeah, and a mobile nuclear missile launcher, which because submarines hadn't been invented yet, that would mean the Soviet Union had second strike capability. So you have to destroy that, kill all the people with superpowers, get all the bank numbers and give them back to the government. And then it turns out the spy that betrayed the country and went along with this plan actually did it at behest of the president, but she still has to be murdered at the end and called a traitor for the rest of her life in order for this cover story to stay intact. And so basically the super spy that you play as, Snake, goes insane because of this. And that's 5, and Peace Walker is basically Snake gradually going insane, and he takes on the name Big Boss, which was the spy he killed's name. And he decides he wants to create a utopia for soldiers where people just fight each other for no reason. They're not tools of politicians. They just fight for the joy of it. And he's going to use basically nuclear blackmail to keep everyone from doing anything about it. Like he's just going to steal this island off the coast of Africa, and he'll nuke everyone if they try to stop him.
I've
And
heard
then,
those are surprisingly easy to steal, islands off the coast of Africa.
yeah, uh, what happens? So they send in another super spy named Solid Snake, and Solid Snake stops him. And then 4 years later, terrorists, and that was the plot of the NES games, basically, was stopping Big Boss. So now this is Metal Gear Solid 1. Someone hijacks a military base in Alaska, and they want the corpse of that old spy, Big Boss. And it turns out that both the spy you play as in the NES games and in this new game, Metal Gear Solid, is actually a clone of the original spy. And the bad guy is also a clone of the original spy. But like they changed his genes so that like one got all of the good genes and one got all of the bad genes. And like, so the bad guy has a huge inferiority complex about this. And the big MacGuffin in this game is it's basically a Gundam with nukes called a Metal Gear.
Like a Gundam? What's that?
Like a giant bipedal robot.
Oh, okay.
Like Pacific Rim.
Yeah, like a mech or something.
Yeah. So their plan is to like fulfill Big Boss's original dream of, a warrior paradise. And you foil that, and then there's a lot of convoluted subplots. It's hard to remember. But basically the Secretary of Defense wants to cover everything up by just dropping a nuke on the base, and you have to stop it before that happens. And then a scientist at the base falls in love with a sniper who survived the massacre of Kurds in Iraq in 1991. And another scientist gives you a bioengineered supervirus, which doesn't come into play until way later. And then
it kills everyone who speaks English, right?
No.
A different game?
No, that's I forget what that is. I think it's a movie. What else happens? Oh, and then it turns out that the spy you play as is actually the one with the bad genes, and the bad guy had the good genes, and the government just lied to them because they wanted to test what was more important, nature or nurture. All right, so now we get to Metal Gear Solid 2, which is the hardest one.
Okay, I'm fucking ready.
All right, so that spy, hero spy, the Solid Snake, he leaves the government and he joins an anti-nuclear proliferation NGO. I forget what it's called. But he sneaks onto a tanker that's going through the Hudson River. And like that's the big opening scene as he jumps off the George Washington Bridge onto the boat. And just as he lands on the boat, a Russian special ops team also jumps on the boat and kills everyone on the decks. But there are like thousands of Marines in the hold. So like they kill everyone on the decks, but then try to keep everything normal so that all the soldiers in the hold don't know anything's gone wrong. So you have to sneak in past the Russian guards into the tanker and take pictures of this new Metal Gear that the Marines are designing that's like faster and smaller and can be easily mass produced so that you can spread it to the press. So you're sort of like early 2000s WikiLeaks, basically.
But for weapons of mass destruction.
Right. While you're there, one of the bad guys from the first game runs in, murders the Marine general in front of everyone, and steals the robot and blows up the ship. And you presumably die. It doesn't show you dying. And you get framed for it. Then it cuts to 2 years later. I think this is about 2004 in their timeline.
Hmm.
Um, there's this big lab that's been built in the middle of the New York harbor to clean up the oil spill created by this oil tanker. Of course, it wasn't really an oil tanker, but that's the cover story. And you're a new spy named Ryden, and you've been sent in to stop terrorists who have kidnapped the president while he was there on a state visit and stop them from using a nuke and just blowing up the place and causing a giant oil spill, which is their alleged plan. When you get there, it turns out that all these terrorists have superpowers again. And also, one of them has filled the place with bombs. So you spend the first half of the game just running around trying to keep bombs from going off. Then the second half, you find out Solid Snake isn't dead. Actually, no, sorry. You find out earlier. You meet him, and he calls himself Iroquois Pliskin, Snake Plissken, very subtle. This is the world's greatest spy, remember. And you also find out the guy who's leading these terrorists is the president during the first game, and that also he's also a clone of the spy of the original. He's called Solidus Snake, and he has giant Doc Ock tentacle arms. And also, it turns out he kidnapped your new character, Raiden, and he murdered your parents, and he made you fight as a child soldier in the Liberian Civil War. And it's the real Liberian Civil War. So, like, imagine this tiny white blonde child in like Beast of No Nations with an AK-47.
It's what I mean. I don't doubt that they pulled it off, but just like the like bird's eye view description of that game sounds like ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, no. It's basically. So eventually you get to the president, and here's the current president who you're trying to rescue, and he's like, okay, real talk, I'm actually cooperating with the terrorists because I want to be powerful. And they're like, but you're the president. He's like, yeah, but actually the US government is controlled by this Illuminati type organization called the Patriots. And the terrorist said I could have power if I helped them do this thing. So he dies. I forget how he dies. I think I think Ocelot kills him. I forget now. So the bad guy from Metal Gear Solid 1, the other clone, he had his hand sewn off and attached to one of the other bad guys, a bad guy named Ocelot. And it turns out that that hand had micro nano machines in it. And so now he can take control of Ocelot's body from his severed human hand. And so whenever Solid Snake appears, Liquid Snake takes over Ocelot's body and they fight. What else happens? So eventually you get this. Oh, okay. The second twist is that this big oil cleanup center is not actually an oil cleanup center. They're building a giant, like city-sized Metal Gear for the explicit purpose of controlling the internet. Like it's just a giant, massive artificial intelligence that's going to clean up the internet, and
like a big fucking fighting robot that's gonna control the internet.
Yeah, so like it moves around so no one can destroy it.
Like Turning Point USA, basically.
Yeah, and so one of the engineers you meet, who's she's the little sister of a character from the first game, and there's a subplot about how that scientist ran away from home because he almost entered an incestuous relationship with his stepmother. I don't know why they decided to throw that in. So you put in the virus and it kind of glitches out the system, but it doesn't break the machine entirely. And then you get kidnapped and you're on the machine, which is now moving around New York Harbor. And so you're always in communication with like a base in these games. Like there's always like a captain who gives you instructions. And in this case, there's a captain, and there's your girlfriend who's also like your medical advisor or something. Like she saves games. I don't know what that means in the context of the game, but she's who you call when you want to save. And when you're on the ship, because it's glitched out, you realize that the people you've been talking to the entire game are actually the AI that controls the ship, pretending to be those people.
Oh no! That's actually a really good twist. I like that.
And like, yeah, there's this amazing sequence where like, because the AI is kind of broken, they just say weird nonsense and like break the fourth wall. And it's like,
And it kind of reminds me of Undertale, but like in a game where you assassinate the president.
yeah. And eventually you fight your way to the top of the giant robot, and there's this big army of the small mass producible, and you fight a bunch of them. And then there's another twist, which is actually this whole scenario was dreamed up by the AI for the explicit purpose of trying to train a super soldier in the mold of the original Spy. And then they crashed the ship into New York, and there was originally a big cinematic sequence of the ship crashing through lower Manhattan. But then while development was happening, 9/11 happened, and so all that got deleted and burned to the ground. And so it just cuts, and
it's really bizarre that it's like a fantasy, like, you know, like a plot elements that you would expect from a Call of Duty game, but actually taking its plot serious.
yeah,
Like there's the fantasy elements and the like real life elements are so close to each other. It gets
yeah, it's totally weird. But I like that. I like that more than the way Call of Duty
I
does
like
it.
that too. I like that too.
Creating fictional countries.
It's weird because it seems like they actually are a lot more explicitly political than a lot of games that kind of brand themselves as political, like Wolfenstein.
Oh yeah,
Basically, like the biggest thing that Wolfenstein has to say is that like literal like swastika wearing Nazis are
yeah.
bad.
And fathers who make their children kill dogs are also bad.
Yeah, like wow, big controversial statement. And then, but it seems like Metal Gear Solid is able to say a lot more like explicitly political things. Like the president is cooperating with terrorists, which
right.
I'm looking for a way to say this that's not conspiracy theory-ish. But like the incentives of the president and the incentives of the people who did 9/11 are not actually like that far apart as people want to believe, you know? And that's a much more like political not message, because maybe I'm like reading too much into it, but it's a much more like political segment of gameplay than anything in Wolfenstein. And it seems like they're able to do that because there's also these like ridiculous fantasy elements and you fight giant robots.
Yeah, well, I didn't get to the weirdest part about this game, which is the very end. So what happens is it cuts and the ship is just like, I think it's in the public library, like it's just half destroyed it. And like just in the middle of New York City, and you're on top of it. And that the evil AI calls you up again, and it basically tries to convince you to keep doing your job. And what it does is it basically tries to lays out justification for censoring the internet. And so basically they absolutely describe, like in correct terms, the fake news epidemic of 2016. Like almost perfectly predicted.
And it's like before fake news was a thing?
Right, this was 2001.
Wow, that's the biggest plot twist of all.
Yeah, that's the weirdest thing. And then eventually that doesn't work, so they just blackmail you by threatening to kill another character's baby. And so that works. And then, so you killed the main bad guy, who's the third clone. He's still alive somehow. And then there's a big philosophical discussion between Raiden and Snake about what we pass on to the next generation and stuff like that. And it goes on for like 30 minutes, and I can't remember any of it. And it's funny because it's just happening like on the middle of Madison Avenue in New York. And like people are just walking by, like businessmen and cab drivers are just like, oh yeah, I guess there's a giant robot in the city. It's great.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah. I definitely recommend playing Metal Gear Solid 2 because
I
an
hope
experience.
to give it a try, or at least like do a let's play. Or yeah. So it's interesting to me that it seems like they're able to kind of get away with saying a lot more, like getting closer to a real political message because it comes off as so ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
I had no idea any of that stuff was below the surface because if you just Google like Metal Gear Solid, you get images of people like fighting giant robots. So,
Right.
okay, cool.
And then I could do the plot of 4 because that's the last one
Okay.
chronologically.
I mean, if you like want to keep going, you've been explaining for a long time.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like what's a fast way to do it. Basically, so it takes place in the future, and basically instead of trying to control information, like war is all fought by corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Like basically they're just different private military contractors. No one really fights for armies anymore. Like it's just random terrorists and mercenaries. And basically like the entire economy is propped up on this system of mercenaries. And the bad guy, Ocelot and Liquid Snake, who have merged after getting that arm attachment and switching personalities, they want to destroy it in the hopes of bringing back freedom. And the evil AI that controls the entire economy and US government wants you to stop them. And eventually, the scientist who invented the superbug that kills you, that is killing Solid Snake, like at this point, it's only 4 years in the future from the other games, but like Solid Snake looks like he's aged 40 years. Like he looks like a really old man because of this virus that's killing him. They re-engineer the virus to infect the AI that'll kill the evil part that like controls people's personal lives but won't cause like a giant economic recession. And it ends with like a giant anime style one-on-one standoff between Solid Snake and Liquid Snake. And then like all the subplots get happy endings, like really pat happy endings, and it's kind of like a saccharine and not very satisfying. And then it turns it turns out the dead spy from the original game is still alive as like a 120-year-old man. And they meet like their clone, the good clone, Solid Snake, and like they all have a discussion about life's meaning, and then Big Boss kills himself, and that's the end of the game.
Cool. Yeah, it's weird that they're mashing together these like extreme fantasy. It's almost like there's uh like you get a certain amount of reality that you get to put into your game or movie or whatever, and that Metal Gear Solid runs a deficit through all of these like fantasy elements, so they're allowed to have basically like bioterrorism. The big threat is not someone trying to blow up the whole world, but someone trying to cause an economic recession.
Right.
Things like that.
Well, that was always like my favorite supervillain plot device, is when the supervillain is just trying to do a really extreme version of insider trading. Like, oh, I'm going to bet on this stock going down and then blow up one of their airplanes. Like, I like that because I could always imagine someone actually trying that.
That honestly sounds like something that Trump would do, but like maybe not with blowing up someone's airplane,
Well, one of his friends made a huge trade right before Trump announced something. I think like he went short on steel, and then Trump announced the steel tariffs. So like he just made
Oh yeah,
like
that's
$8 million in a day.
I would be astonished if that's a coincidence. Cool. Anything else to say about Metal Gear Solid? Are there does it like express anything through kind of the Ludo narrative, or is it mainly through plot and stuff?
There are a few, mostly no. Mostly it's like a random stealth action game. It's the same as like Splinter Cell or Given Tenshu to an extent. But then there are moments, like there's a dream sequence where a character who's a psychic makes you walk through this river, and everyone you've killed in the game, like you have to see. So if you've killed a lot of people up to that point, like it takes forever and it's this miserable, boring experience. Whereas if you killed no one, it's like over in 5 seconds.
That's pretty cool.
What else? No, that's pretty much it.
I always like it that when there are games where you don't actually like have to kill anybody.
Yeah, and Metal Gear Solid is one of those games. Like I don't think you have to kill anyone in at least any of the Solid series.
It sounds like weirdly similar to Undertale actually, because it like doesn't make you kill anyone. It has these weird like fourth wall breaking moments that also say something about the game and like what it means that you're playing this game. And
Yeah.
there was a third thing, but I forget what it was. Yeah, cool. So do you want to talk about Darkest Dungeon?
Yeah, tell me about Darkest Dungeon.
Okay, you are familiar with this game as well, right?
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me is it kind of made this aesthetic connection in my head that I don't think would have been made any other way between Lovecraftian horror and capitalist like the problems of the capitalist system. And I think it's interesting that it makes this kind of connection between and other people of course won't read the game this way, but I did. It makes this kind of connection between Lovecraftian horror, like things that we can pretty much all agree are like bad, causing a problem in the world, but we don't understand them, and the people that do understand them are maybe a little bit crazy, and the system of wage exploitation, which I think people experience very similarly in that we know that, for example, poverty or homelessness is bad, but we can't really like conceive of what's causing that. Sorry, I know that the connection seems a little bit silly, but like in my head, aesthetically, it's very.
No, I mean, H Bomber Guy made a video about Darkest Dungeon, and he said he was like being the HR manager for the worst company in the world.
Yeah, yeah, it's that. It is that.
Because you really are just like using and abusing people, and then leaving them like insane alcoholics.
Yeah, I'll describe the game mechanics. Basically, the game is this: if you take Dungeons and Dragons or like any dungeon delving game, and you sit down and you're like, okay, but the things that these characters are doing, if you did them in real life, they would really, really suck. Like you would have post traumatic stress disorder, and your life would be ruined forever after even one like D&D adventure. And someone set out to make a game that is basically reflects that. So in Darkest Dungeon, you're managing a party of adventurers. You're not an adventurer yourself, and you like send them into various dungeons to like collect treasure. And the end goal is to restore your estate. You're like a feudal lord or something. And the end goal is to restore your estate. Send them into these dungeons to help you achieve that. And it almost universally goes really, really bad for them. Like most of the quests that you send them on, you'll fail. A lot of times characters die. When they die, they're just gone forever. And when you succeed, usually it's at a cost. You know, it's very rare that in this game you succeed and then it's just unambiguously like, oh, this was a good thing, everything's better now. I've had quests you send adventurers in 4 at a time. I've had several quests where all but one adventurer dies and it still counts as a success. And so the game kind of rewards you for and almost requires you to just fucking grind these people into dust. In fact, like the first 10 hours of the game, I was really, really bad at it because I hadn't realized something that the game was trying to teach me, which is that some of these people are going to die, and if you don't expose them to those risks, you are not going to succeed at like restoring your mana. So I would just quit a quest as soon as it was starting to look like one of my heroes was going to die or was like in serious fear. And the problem is that starting a quest takes money. And so if you do that, if every time your heroes are exposed to danger, you're like, all right, we're not doing this. Go home. I don't want to risk that guy. You're not going to be very good at the game. So it puts you in the situation where you kind of like, based on the situation, have to grind these characters into dust. And I want to emphasize something before we just like start talking about it, which is that I think it's a good reflection of the mindset of someone who's running like a capitalist enterprise where you know basically have to ignore your employees' mental health problems, ignore their conditions in order to like turn a profit.
Right.
I don't think I think there's kind of a danger in assuming that it's an exact reflection, because in Darkest Dungeon, if you don't like grind your employees into dust, you're fucked and it's not going to work out. At Starbucks, they could probably pay you $15 an hour and give you more sick days, and they would be fine.
Is there a win state in Darkest Dungeon?
Yeah, it's there's a dungeon. It's the darkest one, and you go in there and you kill the like big boss. And okay, cool. Spoilers. So if you are watching and you don't want to know how the game ends,
I'm not worried.
Like 2 minutes. The final boss is your ancestor. So like the intro is like this guy writing a letter of like our manor has fallen into disrepute and I'm about to die. So I need you to come and like restore it. Also, it's like infested by Lovecraftian horrors, so there's that. And when you like finally fight the final boss, it is your ancestor.
It's how Rogue Legacy ends too. I just realized.
Yeah. I played that game. I think it's kind of a roguelike tradition. They also do something this is kind of like getting away from the like lefty politics aspect of it, but they do something mechanical that like people just freak the fuck out about, which is that in the so there's like several rounds of final bosses. There's like 3 levels to the Darkest Dungeon, and the first one is some forgettable boss that no one gives a shit about. The second one is your ancestor, and the third one is like the heart of the dungeon or something. And when you get to the final boss, the first thing that you have to do is, of your 4 adventurers, you have to pick one of them to die. Like one of them is just, there's no getting around it. You just pick one of them and they're gone. And so even though you've probably lost like dozens of characters by this point, this it like hurts a lot. It hurts you a lot more to be in a situation where there's really nothing you can do. You just have to pick somebody who gets to get eaten by a giant heart.
Well, there's no like abstractness. Like there's no risk. Like you can't pretend those were just the breaks the way you can for the rest of the game.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I think another thing, like just in terms of the kind of connection between game design and political understanding of the world. I think that games, more than like books or movies, allow you to help a player like experience a space, experience kind of a tone, because most books are kind of oriented towards the plot, but in Darkest Dungeon, nothing much happens. You know, like most of the game is spent repeating the same like couple of actions. So once you've played through the first couple of dungeons, you basically get the idea, and you would only really want to return to the game if you want to like experience that tone again. And so I think it does a really good job of kind of placing you in the driver's seat of, well, like that H Bomber guy video said, the worst in the world. So
right.
Instead of like, I wanted to talk about this a little bit more in terms of tabletop games in particular. But I think all media, but especially games, have a power to not just explain an idea about the world, but let you like experience it
right.
directly or indirectly.
Right, like it. I mean, in a sense, movies let you experience it, but in what games do, what the other medium can, is you have to make the same choices as a character would.
Yeah.
Like you don't get to like think about them as an academic exercise.
Yeah, it's similar. Like for games like Papers, Please, there's no separation, right? Like you're the bad person that is being judged,
right? Instead
of yeah. So something kind of similar can happen in books and movies. So do you know the Zero Books? It's like a publishing house.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
They're great. They published something called Capitalist Realism that the whole left is excited about. That happened a few years ago. They also have a YouTube channel, and the main guy from the publishing house, Douglas Lane, wrote a book that is basically just this. It's a kind of, I mean, it has a plot. It's a pretty good book, but it seems to me like the main point is to show you a direct experience of a kind of abstract left-wing idea, which is that with enough technological innovation, the division between play, like games, and work could get completely eroded to the point that no one is able or even wants to make a distinction between working and playing. And he writes a book where exactly that thing happens. And it's strange because me just like telling it to you right now, it's probably kind of hard to imagine. Like, well, I can distinguish between my job and the video games that I play pretty easily.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What you're saying is this is a world where like they've used technology to make all work fun.
Not just that they've made use technology to make all work fun, but that people can set people. So it involves like a virtual reality, like AI, something, blah blah blah, and basically people don't even think of it as work, right? It's not like I'm going to go to my job and we've used gamification to make that job amazing. It's like you like put your VR head goggles on and the computer shows you something that basically is formalized as a game that encourages you to perform actions that coincidentally are also important for the well-being of the economy. So like there's a scene where people are playing this like weird like stack 'em up Tetris game, and the main character, who isn't wearing the goggles, can see that what they're actually doing is kind of like moving things around in an assembly line, more or less. But it's just like some random people that don't know each other and decided that they wanted to play a game. And so it's not just that like work is fun, it's that like there is no such thing as work anymore. And it's weird because I wouldn't have been able to imagine that except that he went ahead and imagined it for me.
So where do people get their like where do people get money in that system?
Well, the book follows just the first couple of days. I think it's a little bit confusing in some places, but basically there is a virtual reality like artificial intelligence thing that both controls all of the games and controls the economy. So just like if you want a thing, you tell the VI, its name is Bucky, and it like absorbs that information and then absorbs that information into the list of like things that need to get created, and then someone else creates it while they're like playing a game.
Okay.
Yeah, it's also fucking weird. It's like a weird ass book. A lot of other stuff happens.
I guess it's telling that I can't tell if this is supposed to be a dystopia or a utopia.
Yeah, there's that ambiguity isn't just in my like telling of it. It's also in the book as well. And there are some conversations between the main character and the VI where they can't really tell either, right? Like even the VI is like seems to kind of think that maybe what it's doing isn't great. Like they have this conversation about like if you can predict the future and you know that something bad is going to happen, do you have a responsibility to stop it? Which for like a human being, for like a human person, that's not a hard question, but it's a much more difficult question for the VI because they don't they're able to see basically that if you do something that like prevents this person from dying, it changes the world in like all these other ways. Yeah, it's a weird book. We should probably move on from that. It's called Bash Bash Revolution, if anyone wants to check it out. There's an audiobook as well, which is pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason I was talking about that is because I think that games especially are able to kind of put you in a space, right? Instead of like there's a game Cart Life where like instead of reading about how running a small business that is composed of like just you and your family, and living on the edge of poverty, how it like affects the way that you view yourself and the world and how you like think of other people. Instead of just reading about someone else doing that, you can to some extent experience it yourself. And of course, like playing a difficult, and playing a video game that makes you feel bad is very different from living in actual poverty. But the point is that you empathize with that person because you, in a virtual space, have like been through the thing that they're doing.
I remember you were going to talk about this war of mine, so I think that connects to that. Want to give an example, or use it as an example?
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually so this War of Mine, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a game about the siege of Sarajevo, and I actually took a class studying the siege of Sarajevo. We read a like an ethnography of someone who lived there and like studied the experience. And what's interesting is that the game doesn't quite mirror the experience. Like there's some really like interesting things about the experience that are kind of scooped out from the game, but it manages to put you it's like a realistic representation without being a realistic representation of the thing that it's a mirror of, if that makes sense. So it's not exactly a realistic representation of the siege of Sarajevo, but it puts you in this headspace of like someone who is living in a city under siege and who is just like, you know, trying to eat food and not get shot at by snipers.
Yeah, I got the sense that like society doesn't actually break down that much during war, like the way in this War of Mine, whereas like literally if you leave your house unattended for 5 minutes, everything's gone.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, that is the main thing that was different. People talked about one of the main like concepts that the ethnographer talked about. Her name is Ivana Machek. If anyone wants to check her out, is what she calls imitation of real life, where people would be, you know, just like going to school, going to parties, stuff like that. But also, you know, 20 miles that way, there's a fucking invading army that wants to kill you. And so even when you're, you know, just like going to the grocery store or something, there's kind of this feeling that you're living a fake life. You're living a copy of real life. And that's fucking really hard to express in a game, but minus that one element, I think it does a good job of kind of putting you in the headspace of someone who is in that situation. All right. Is there anything else? I have tabletop games, etc., written down on our list of things to talk about. I feel like I've been talking for a really long time.
No, I don't think you took any longer than I did to explain Metal Gear. So, you know, we did a little pre-chat before this where we just talked about what we were going to talk about, and that actually got me thinking about what it is in common between politics and games that brought me to both. And I realized what it was that I just like I'm good at understanding complex systems and breaking them down. And so like naturally when I'm playing video games I do that. And like the reason I made so many political videos is like I kind of came to, you know, I'm pretty old, like I'm 27 and I grew up during the Iraq War, and like when I was in high school, like we were studying the Holocaust, and at the same time you're studying the Holocaust, like people around me would just casually be like, we should solve the war by dropping a nuke on Iraq and killing everyone. And like so like I was always knew that like, you know, it could happen here. But what I realized was that politics was just complex enough that people that level of abstraction let people create these, like people would act like monsters. Like it would never occur to you to kill someone to take their stuff, but if a politician says we're going to kill a class of people and take their stuff and give it to you, they'll vote for that because there's just the right level of abstraction between policy and consequences that people can psychologically allow themselves to go through with it. And so like I feel like what I want my channel is to break down the relationship between what people say about politics and the policy that gets implemented, and then the human consequences of that policy.
Yeah.
And the alt-right is almost, it's a project around obscuring that so that they can get away with horrible things.
Yeah. I definitely see what you mean about obscuring the issue. And there's a lot of kind of political policies I've seen where the thing that you do if you want to criticize those political policies is you just describe without abstraction what it is that the person is proposing to do.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of like it seems more and more every day like we're going to invade Iran for some reason. And if you just describe like the reasons that we have for doing that and the likely effect, no one supports it. But if you kind of get a few like levels above that, it suddenly becomes a kind of defensible.
Well, no, you know, this is really annoying. So I wrote a script that was going to be all about how the alt-right responded to the strikes in Syria. And after I finished it and I started recording, Trump goes on TV and rips up the Iran deal. So now I have to rewrite everything. You know, the thing about Iran is, like the thing Republicans want is essentially 100% access to all of Iran's military assets, which no country would agree to. So they're setting up a situation where either Iran surrenders or fights for survival, and they're going to choose the latter. And so basically what they've done with this deal is they're creating a situation in which the choice is a nuclear standoff between Israel and Iran or regime change in Iran because they want the latter. And so by tearing up this deal, Iran's going to get scared. They're going to start a nuclear weapons program. And then after they've done that, they can go on TV and say, well, it's this or that.
Yeah. It seems like our kind of policy making apparatus is a little bit like it has amnesia or something, right? Because people talk about like I feel like one of the issues with trying to get Iran to disband their nuclear program, everyone knows what happened to Gaddafi when he stopped, you know, pursuing nuclear weapons, right? Like he stopped making weapons, and he was overthrown relatively soon afterwards. And no one brings that context to these discussions. Like especially, I think it's especially important with North Korea because Kim Jong whatever is a dictator, right? And
Right.
he's probably looking to like how has America treated other dictators in the past as evidence of as kind of a guide to what he should do. And people are forgetting that. People are pretending like this is the first time this has ever happened. And I think a big part of the problem is just that you know, like people die and like new people are born. Like if someone hadn't explained that to me because I wasn't alive when it happened, I don't think it would even occur to me to think like, oh well, what's the historical precedent for this?
Yeah, and a lot of my politics videos just end up becoming historical tirades for that reason, because it's not like you can't understand the world it is as it is without it.
But Sarcasmitron, facts don't care about your feelings.
Of course.
Yeah.
But also I'm very scared and angry that people have feelings, and we must use government policy to oppress them.
Have you seen so like a couple of days ago, Ben Shapiro got into this like indirect argument on Twitter with a 12-year-old?
I did not see this.
It just fucking killed me. So like this woman posted like something about how her daughter was at the dentist office and there was no female doctor, and she was like, why did we come here if there's no female doctor? Because you know she's 12 and she's kind of freaked out by like a grown-ass man putting their fingers
Right.
in. And like out of nowhere, Ben Shapiro shows up and is like, well, you should have told her that actually the majority of people in dental school are women, instead of letting her believe that she's a victim. It's amazing to me that it's like the perfect pairing of like Ben Shapiro versus a 12-year-old. Oh, I wanted to add something onto the history thing. The more that I study history, the more it seems that like left-wing history has been kind of systematically rejected as existing. Like this is why I think it's kind of important for conservatives to make these ridiculous claims that, like, oh, if Martin Luther King were alive today, he would be a conservative, because if you just look at like the past history of almost all left-wing uh, political movements in society, they've mostly had good results with some notable exceptions. Um, and if you view, for example, if you view the like nonviolent protest movement of today as a continuation of the nonviolent protest movement of like the civil rights era, it becomes a lot harder to demonize the protesters, because if you think of them as a continuation of like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, it's a lot harder to say, well, oh well, they're basically just fascists. I think it should be okay for motorists to run over protesters.
Right.
So yeah, I think this kind of like historical amnesia is a big
Well, selective amnesia, because they're very keen on blaming Black Lives Matter for the Chinese Great Leap Forward.
What the fuck? Okay, that's.
Well, I mean, like,
Black Lives Matter.
like Jordan Peterson. Like, there was an interview where someone's like, trans activists aren't the same thing as Stalinists, and he's like, why not? And that was his response.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of like heavy lifting to get that propagandistic about other people's ideas, because I don't actually know what postmodernism is, but if you look at socialism, the idea is not that complicated. It's like worker ownership of the means of production, and you can agree with that or you can disagree with that. But what the right seems to want to do is to take that idea, throw it away, and tell you that actually socialism means that you give trophies to the kids who didn't win at Little League.
Right.
Like it's just a complete ignorance of like the actual thing that left wingers are actually advocate for. And I think Ben Shapiro's main tactic is like obfuscate, say something confusing, and then claim victory over the debate. He wrote a debate book that is basically a guide to not actually getting in discussions with people.
Right. Those how to debate liberals and destroy them, and he's standing cross-armed.
I have it on my computer. It's saved as 5'4", the height of Ben Shapiro. I just like to remind myself that he's a full foot shorter than me every time. Yeah, so much for the tolerant left.
And I mean, I think, I watched your video about Ben Shapiro, and I think you overcomplicated things. I think it's just he wins debates by having them end ambiguously and then having an army of sycophants put videos on YouTube entitled "Ben Shapiro Destroys Campus Protester."
Yeah. I tend to overcomplicate things a little bit. Yeah, I was writing a script the other day about like some Lauren Southern thing, and I like stopped, and the moment that I realized I might be disappearing up my own ass is like, do you really have to explain Cartesian dualism to like explain why Lauren Southern is wrong about like people losing their virginities too young?
No, but it might be fun.
Probably not. Yeah, that's the other thing, is like sometimes disappearing up your own ass is kind of fun,
Right.
And like honestly, so this is a thing that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of like what is the purpose of creating a video. Honestly, I don't like Lauren Southern is wrong, and hopefully most people, hopefully if you're like on my channel, you don't need me to tell you that Lauren Southern is wrong about most of the things that she says. But I want to like go beyond just like she's wrong, and like what is the basis of her ideas about the world. And maybe I shouldn't be like thinking maybe I'm like ascribing too much complicated thought to Lauren Southern's actions. Yeah, she probably doesn't know what Cartesian dualism is either. Cool. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's it for like things I wanted to say about this topic. Oh wait, I thought of a thing that I want to talk about, which is the connection between game design and the educational system. Because I'm not sure if you had this experience, but the like people that I've talked to who are like really into game design and also recently went to high school or college talk about how this experience of learning game design, basically learning how you encourage people to do things in a system, right? Like a good tutorial should tell you what you need to know tell you what you need to do, tell you how you're going to succeed in this game, what's the point of the game, without you ever knowing that it's teaching you those things, right?
Right.
So then you compare like games with good tutorials to like the educational system, and it becomes very very clear that the people that went to game design school need to be designing our educational system, and the people that designed our educational system need to go to like a gulag or something.
um, so I made a video about tutorials. Have you watched that?
Probably. I don't remember. Maybe if you like start saying stuff from the video, or
But yeah, like I guess the point of that video is actually kind of the push back against um this idea in game design that like everything should be wordless and subconscious.
Mhm.
Like what's important is getting the player to do it because that's really how you learn. And
Yeah,
sometimes the most efficient way to do that is to just tell them. So I think it's more of a it's a case by case thing.
yeah. I agree. I was presenting kind of a one-sided view of it. My thing is
Okay.
that, like if a game designer is able to tell you what you need to know without you knowing that they're telling you, it's kind of an indication of their design skill. But then there are games like Civilizations or like Dwarf Fortress or like Dungeons and Dragons where I do want to know when I'm being told the rules because the rules are fucking complicated and you do need to actually just like sit down and learn. Um, but so one thing about the educational system that is kind of my like uh, my main point about like how it's not really designed well is the way that grades relate to uh, education, like actually learning things independent of grades. And it seems like the way that students are graded encourages them to kind of bullshit around like actually learning things. Like I've been in plenty of situations where actually just straight studying the material, like learning the thing that the class is supposed to be about, is a much less efficient way to get a good grade than um, uh, than doing some other thing like practicing multiple choice exams or something.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and that's just the problem. Like the thing is, there are so many things that can prevent someone from learning,
mhm.
and a letter grade just collapses that into one degree of how well you know the material, and it doesn't tell you what the problem is.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like how you can create a model of what the problem is without like literally sitting down with every student and talking to them for hours at a time.
Well, do you think we really need letter grades in most situations?
Uh, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence about this because when you bring it up, people are like, "Oh, but what about doctors? Do you really want doctors where you don't know what their grades were?" And no, not really. I care a lot more about whether or not they're able to do surgery and stuff. Um, but well, yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But
Right. I think what we need is just better ways of quantifying things because, an MCAT score captures a lot of things other than will you be a good doctor? It's test anxiety, it's English language skills, it's, a bunch of things. If you were tired that day.
yeah. Same with like IQ tests, and this is, I mean, that's a whole another can of worms. But
And I don't like, like I said, I'm a liberal reformist. So, my first instinct is just to try and see if there isn't just a way to design tests better.
yeah, I think there probably is, but to some extent, I would say that like uh, quantifying these scales at all is
Is always going to be problematic. Yeah,
well,
no, I agree.
it's necessarily going to lead to people caring more about the like metric than actually was I good at the game
Yeah,
or was I good at knowing how to be a doctor or whatever. Um, yeah. Okay, I think that we have exhausted this topic and also possibly ourselves.
yeah. Um, it was a nice talk. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was good. We should do this again sometime.
All right, great.
All right. Do you want to like have an outro where you explain again what your channel is? I think we have
Uh,
8 viewer at this point. So
okay, cool. Hello, viewer. I'm Sarcasmitron. I'm at YouTube/user/Sarcasmitron. Um, I have videos about video game design and the alt-right. And my next video, I guess, is going to be about Iran, if that's interesting at all. Um, please watch it. That's it.
all right. And I'm James. If you're watching this video, you probably know who I am. Anyway, yeah, go head over to Sarcasmitron's channel. It's really, really good. There will probably be a link in the description if you're not watching this live. If you are, I forgot to put it there. So yeah, bye.